My stepmother told the judge I was dishonorably discharged and stole from my dying father. Her own expert witness was the man I'd dragged through a chemical breach. I sat perfectly still when she said it, hands flat on the defendant's table, thumbs pressed inward against my palms. The fluorescent lights in that courtroom bounced off every surface the same way they bounce off gray steel below deck. Cold, institutional, the kind of light that doesn't care what it illuminates. My name is Meredith Ashby. I'm 38 years old. I've served 16 years in the United States Navy. And 7 weeks after burying my father, I was sitting in a county courtroom in Virginia while a woman in a silk blouse and pearl earrings told a judge I was a danger to myself and others. The rain hit the courthouse windows in sheets. November rain, the kind that seals a building shut, makes the air inside feel recycled and permanent, like a ship, like the deep belly of a hospital vessel where the engine vibration hums through the bulkhead and into your teeth, and you stop noticing it after the first deployment, but you never stop feeling it. I know that feeling. I lived inside it for years. I entered the Navy at 22. Nursing Corps. Designator 2900. I wanted to be a trauma nurse because I'd watched my mother die slowly in a hospital where no one moved fast enough, and I decided I would be the person who moved fast enough. I trained at Portsmouth. I deployed to Bahrain. I ran triage in a field hospital where the antiseptic never quite covered the copper smell of blood, and the fluorescent light turned everything the same shade of green. I was good, not loud about it, not decorated on a stage, just good. By 28, I'd been pulled into something I can't fully name. CBRNE operations: chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, explosives. Medical response in environments the Department of Defense does not publicly acknowledge exist. My clearance was reclassified. My deployment history was redacted. My unit didn't have a name most people would find in a database. When my father asked what I did, I told him I worked in medical records at the VA. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his face every time. The way his jaw would set, the way he'd look at me a beat too long, the way he'd nod and say, "All right, sweetheart." He knew I was carrying something. He just didn't know what, and he loved me enough not to push. He gave me his watch before my first deployment, a plain Timex, a nothing expensive. He'd worn it every day since I was a girl, and the day I shipped out, he pressed it into my hand and said, "So you always know what time it is where I am." I had it engraved on the back. Those exact words. I wore it through every deployment, every decon shower, every 18-hour shift in a SCIF that smelled like recycled nothing and burnt coffee. The band is cracked now. The crystal is scratched. The second hand still moves. 5 years ago, I was deployed aboard the USNS Mercy in the Persian Gulf. Operation Sandstone Protocol. I was the senior CBRNE nurse assigned to the forward treatment bays. On the 14th day of that deployment, a chemical agent breached Treatment Bay 4. I won't name the agent. I'm not permitted to. What I can tell you is that when the alarm sounded, there were 9 people in that bay. One of them was a Navy psychiatrist, Lieutenant Marcus Hale. He'd been conducting evaluations on crew who'd been exposed to low-level contaminants. He was closest to the breach point. The protocol was to evacuate and seal the bulkheads. Let the automated decon system cycle. Wait for an all clear. I didn't evacuate. I sealed the bulkheads from the inside, locked myself in the hot zone with Hale and 2 other casualties who couldn't move. The decon showers were 14 feet from where Hale was lying. 14 feet doesn't sound far. It is when the air is contaminated, and you're dragging a man who outweighs you by 60 pounds, and your hands are submerged in a chemical solvent that is dissolving the nerve sheaths in your fingers while you move. My fine motor skills failed at about the 8-foot mark. My fingers wouldn't close, or so I did the only thing I could. I pressed my thumbs flat against my palms, locked my grip on his collar, and I dragged him the last 6 feet by brute force and geometry. 0 casualties in Bay 4 that day. Every person walked out. Hale walked out with chemical burns on his neck and a concussion. I walked out with bilateral nerve sheath degradation in both hands. Permanent. The tremor started 3 weeks later and never stopped. I manage it. I press my thumbs inward, lock the muscles, and my hands go still. It's the same motion I used to save his life. Now I use it to hold a coffee cup without spilling. That was the cost. Not a medal. Not a commendation I could frame. A tremor I hide in my lap under conference tables and in my pockets at grocery stores. A tremor my stepmother would later describe in a sworn affidavit as evidence of substance withdrawal. The thing about classified service is that silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the weight of what people think they know about you, pressed down so hard it squeezes the breath out of your own truth. My father married Diane 6 years ago. I was deployed. I missed the wedding. I'd also missed his 61st birthday and his 62nd. I missed the day he was diagnosed. I was in a facility I cannot name, in a country I cannot confirm, treating casualties from an event that will not appear in any public record for another 30 years. He called me. I couldn't answer. He left a voicemail. I listened to it 11 hours later in a parking garage, still wearing my lanyard, my hands shaking so badly I had to use both thumbs to press play. Mir, it's Dad. I got some news today. I'd rather tell you in person, but I know how your work is. I love you, sweetheart. Call when you can. I called. 14 hours after his voicemail. Diane answered. She said he was resting. She said she'd have him call me back. He never did. I found out later she'd told him I hadn't returned his call at all. Denial, I would learn, was her specialty. It started slowly. 2 years ago, when she married him, it was small things. My childhood photos moved from the hallway to a box in the garage. My room converted to her home office. My name absent from the family Christmas card. Then it escalated. She told neighbors I had a substance problem. She told his friends at the Rotary that I'd been discharged from the military under unspecified circumstances. She told his oncologist I was not an authorized contact for his medical records. She didn't just forget me. She rewrote me. 10 weeks before my father died, his cancer turned terminal. The doctors said weeks, not months. I put in for emergency leave. I flew 14 hours to get home. I drove straight from the airport to the house. If you've ever been judged by someone who doesn't know the real story, hit that like button and subscribe. Diane met me at the door, not to let me in, to hand me a manila envelope. Inside was a restraining order. Filed that morning. It alleged I was mentally unstable, financially predatory, and a threat to a vulnerable adult. It cited my tremor as evidence of active substance abuse. It cited my classified absences as evidence of erratic, unexplained behavior. It cited my VA cover story and called me a low-level records clerk with delusions of military grandeur. The restraining order held for 21 days. 21 days I sat in the parking lot of the hospital where my father was dying. I could see his window from the 3rd row of the visitor lot. Sometimes at night, if the blinds were open, I could see the blue glow of his television. I sat in a rental car and watched that window and pressed my thumbs against my palms and did not move. He died on a Tuesday. I was 200 yards away. Diane did not call me. I learned about it from a nurse who recognized my last name on a form and walked out to the parking lot on her break. "I'm so sorry, honey. He went about an hour ago. He was asking for someone named Mir." That was it. No goodbye. No hand to hold. Just a parking lot in the rain and a dead man's watch on my wrist. 7 weeks later, I was sitting in a courtroom. Diane's lawyer was a man named Richard Caldwell. Tall, silver hair. The kind of confidence that comes from winning cases against people who can't afford to fight back. He stood before Judge Thomas Whitfield and laid out his case like he was presenting at a shareholders' meeting. Calm, methodical, certain. He entered the restraining order into evidence. He entered Diane's sworn affidavit describing my history of erratic behavior and substance dependency. He entered a letter, allegedly written by my father, requesting that I be removed from his will and barred from the estate. He entered Diane's financial records, showing she had been my father's sole caretaker and primary beneficiary. And then he entered the name of their expert psychiatric witness, a private practice psychiatrist Diane had hired for an exorbitant fee to testify that, based on his professional evaluation of the submitted records, Meredith Ashby was mentally unfit, emotionally volatile, and should be permanently barred from the estate. Dr. Marcus Hale. I heard the name, and my hands went still. Not from the thumb lock, from something deeper. Something cold that started at the base of my skull and spread down through my shoulders and into my wrists. They hadn't counted on one thing. Judge Whitfield called for the expert witness. The bailiff opened the side door. A man walked in, mid-40s, clean-shaven, navy blazer, the kind of posture that doesn't come from a gym. It comes from years of standing at attention in places where posture is the difference between respect and reprimand. He carried a leather folder. He walked with the measured cadence of a man who had prepared his testimony thoroughly. He had reviewed the documents. He had studied the affidavits. He was ready to describe in clinical detail why the woman at the defendant's table was unfit. He reached the witness stand. He placed his folder on the rail. He turned to face the courtroom, and then he looked at me. His gaze went to my hands first. The tremor had started again. My right hand, then my left. The fine lateral oscillation that never fully stops, only hides. I pressed my thumbs inward, flat against my palms, locked the muscles. The tremor stopped. "Doctor." Marcus Hale did not sit down. His lips parted. No sound came out. His eyes moved from my hands to the watch on my wrist, then back to my hands, then to my face. The color left his skin in a slow, visible tide, starting at his collar and moving upward until his entire expression had changed from professional composure to something I recognized. It was the look of a man remembering the 14 worst feet of his life. He stood there for 4 seconds. I counted them the way I count everything, by heartbeat. 4 beats. 4 seconds of a man holding a leather folder he no longer believed in, staring at the hands of the woman he'd been paid to destroy. The courtroom didn't notice. Not yet. Judge Whitfield glanced up from his notes. Richard Caldwell adjusted his cufflinks. Diane sat behind her lawyer with her ankles crossed and her chin lifted, waiting for the performance she'd purchased. But I noticed. I noticed because I'd spent 16 years reading rooms, exits, sightlines, Who's armed? Who's afraid? Who's about to break? Hale wasn't afraid. He was recalibrating. His weight had shifted to his back foot. His breathing had changed. His right hand, the one holding the folder, had gone white at the knuckles. He knew. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Enough to make the next words out of his mouth the most important ones he'd speak in that courtroom. Judge Whitfield cleared his throat. "Dr. Hale, you may be seated." Hale didn't move. "Dr. Hale." "Your Honor." His voice was steady. "Barely. I need a moment." Caldwell's head turned. Diane's chin dropped half an inch. The rain hit the windows in a gust that rattled the frame, and for a moment, the only sound in that courtroom was water and fluorescent hum and the slow, mechanical tick of my father's Timex. I kept my hands flat on the table, thumbs locked. I didn't look away from him. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening inside his head. I'd seen it before. I'd seen it in the faces of people who walk back into a room they barely survived and realize they've been standing in it the whole time. "Dr. Hale," Caldwell said, rising slightly from his seat, "is there a problem?" "I need to approach the bench." Caldwell's expression tightened. Diane leaned forward and whispered something to him. He waved her off. Judge Whitfield studied Hale over the rims of his glasses for a long, measured beat, then nodded. Approach." Hale walked to the bench. He set his leather folder down on the rail. He did not open it. He spoke quietly enough that the gallery couldn't hear, but I was 12 feet away, and I have spent a career listening through walls. I heard every word. "Your Honor, I need to disclose a potential conflict. I may have a prior professional and personal connection to the defendant that was not included in any of the materials I was provided." Judge Whitfield's pen stopped moving. "Explain." "I was given a case file describing a woman named Meredith Ashby. The file described her as a former low-level VA employee with a history of substance issues and erratic behavior. No military service record was included, no medical history, no deployment documentation." He paused. "The woman sitting at that table is not who I was told she was." The judge looked at me, then back at Hale. "And you know this how?" "Because 5 years ago, aboard the USNS Mercy in the Persian Gulf, that woman saved my life." The room shifted. Not the people. The room itself. The fluorescent light seemed to buzz louder. The rain against the glass seemed to quiet. Even the air changed, the way it changes in a compartment below deck when someone seals a hatch and the pressure drops. Diane's hand found Caldwell's arm, her nails pressed into his sleeve. I saw the fabric dimple. Judge Whitfield removed his glasses. "Dr. Hale, I'm going to ask you to step back and make this statement on the record. Are you prepared to do that?" "Yes, Your Honor." He returned to the witness stand. This time, he sat. He placed both hands flat on the wooden rail in front of him. His posture had changed. The hired expert was gone. The man sitting there now held himself the way I'd seen junior officers hold themselves during after-action debriefs. Straight spine, level eyes, no performance, just facts. Caldwell stood. "Your Honor, I object to any deviation from the submitted testimony. Dr. Hale was retained to provide a psychiatric evaluation based on—" "Mr. Caldwell." Judge Whitfield's voice was quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet. "Sit down." Caldwell sat. The judge turned to Hale. "Proceed." Hale looked at me one more time, not at my face, at my hands, at the thumbs pressed flat, at the tremor I was holding in place with the same locked grip that had held his collar. "Bay 4, he said. "The solvent burn. Was it you?" The courtroom was silent. Caldwell's pen had stopped. Diane's posture had gone rigid. Judge Whitfield waited. I met his gaze. It was me. Your hands. His voice cracked on the second word. He corrected it. Professional habit. The bilateral tremor, that's from the exposure. Nerve sheath degradation. Both hands. Permanent. Hale closed his eyes. Opened them. When he spoke again, it was to the judge, but his eyes stayed on me. Your Honor, in the spring of 5 years ago, I was deployed aboard the USNS Mercy as part of Operation Sandstone Protocol in the Persian Gulf. I was a Navy lieutenant serving as a psychiatric evaluator for crew members exposed to low-level chemical contaminants. On the 14th day of that deployment, a classified chemical agent breached Treatment Bay 4. He paused. Not for effect, because the memory was physical. I could see it moving through him. The way his shoulders tightened. The way his jaw flexed. Standard protocol was to evacuate and seal the bulkheads. Let the automated decontamination system cycle. I was incapacitated near the breach point. Concussive impact, chemical burns on my neck and upper back. I could not move under my own power. He touched the side of his neck, an unconscious gesture. I knew what was under that collar. I'd seen the burns before they scarred. The senior CBRNE nurse assigned to that bay did not evacuate. She sealed the bulkheads from the inside, locked herself in the contaminated zone with me and 2 other casualties who could not move. The decontamination showers were 14 feet from where I was lying. 14 feet. The number hung in that courtroom like a held breath. She dragged me. 14 feet through a chemical environment that was actively destroying the nerve endings in her hands. At approximately the 8-foot mark, her fine motor function failed. She could no longer close her fingers. So she pressed her thumbs flat against her palms, locked her grip on my collar, and pulled me the remaining 6 feet by brute mechanical force. He turned to face Diane directly. The woman who did that is sitting 12 feet from me right now. She is not a VA records clerk. She is not a substance abuser. She is not mentally unstable. She is a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, and the tremor in her hands, the tremor your affidavit described as evidence of withdrawal, is the permanent physical cost of saving my life. The leather folder sat untouched on the rail. He hadn't opened it once. Diane's face had gone the color of the courthouse walls, pale, institutional. Her lips moved but produced nothing. Caldwell was writing something on his legal pad. His hand was shaking. I noticed that too. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. Dr. Hale, are you formally withdrawing your testimony on behalf of the petitioner? I am, Your Honor. I am also prepared to provide a sworn counterstatement regarding the defendant's military service, her character, and the nature of the injuries I have personally witnessed, if the court will permit it. The court permits it. Hale straightened. Meredith Ashby holds an active, non-disclosed security clearance at a level I am not authorized to specify in open court. Her deployment history is redacted. Her unit designations are classified. Her service record does not appear in standard databases because it is not meant to. She is not absent from the system because she was discharged. She is absent because her work requires it. He paused. The materials I was provided by the petitioner's legal team contained no military records, no service verification, and no medical documentation from the Navy. Either those records were deliberately withheld from me, or they were never sought. In either case, the psychiatric profile I was asked to deliver was built on a foundation that is, in my professional and personal judgment, fabricated. The word landed like a sealed bulkhead. Fabricated. Diane stood. The chair scraped against the floor. Caldwell reached for her arm. She pulled away. That's not. Her voice was high and thin. She told you to say that. She manipulated Mrs. G. Ashby. Judge Whitfield did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. You will sit down, or you will be removed. She sat. Her hands were in her lap. I could see them from 12 feet away. They were trembling. Not from nerve damage, from something else entirely. Hale wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to enter one additional observation into the record. He looked at me again. At the Timex on my wrist, the cracked band, the scratched crystal, the second hand still turning. The watch the defendant is wearing belonged to her father. I know this because during Operation Sandstone Protocol, during the worst 14 feet of my life, I was conscious enough to see two things: her face and that watch. The crystal was pressed against my cheek as she dragged me. I can still feel the edge of it. His voice broke on the last word. He did not correct it this time. That woman did not steal from her father. She wore him on her wrist through every deployment she survived. And the idea that she would be barred from his estate, barred from his bedside, barred from his funeral. He stopped, breathed. By the same system I was almost used to enforce is something I will not be a part of. The courtroom was still, not quiet, still. The rain had softened to a steady pour. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hum. Even the bailiff by the door had stopped shifting his weight. Diane's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound. Caldwell set his pen down. He did not pick it up again. Judge Whitfield removed his glasses a second time. He folded them carefully. He placed them on the bench. He looked at Diane Ashby for a long time. Then he looked at me. Lieutenant Commander Ashby. It was the first time anyone in that room had used my rank. The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. I felt the ripple in my chest before I felt it anywhere else. I pressed my thumbs against my palms, not to stop the tremor this time, to hold myself together. Yes, Your Honor. He studied me. The charcoal blazer, the flat shoes, the hands folded on the defendant's table, the watch. This court is going to recess for 30 minutes. When we reconvene, I intend to address several matters: the validity of the documents entered by the petitioner, the restraining order filed against you, and the question of whether this court was deliberately misled. He turned to Diane. His expression had not changed. That was worse. Mrs. Ashby, I strongly suggest you use the recess to consult with your attorney about the consequences of submitting fabricated evidence to a court of law. The gavel came down once. The sound was small and final. Diane didn't move. Caldwell didn't move. The gallery didn't move. The only motion in that courtroom was the second hand on my father's Timex, still turning, and the rain against the windows still falling, and the slow, visible collapse of a woman who had built her entire case on the assumption that silence meant weakness. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about all of it. When the court reconvened, Judge Whitfield did not begin with formalities. He sat down. He opened a folder. He read from it without looking up. The court has reviewed the letter allegedly authored by Graham Ashby, requesting the disinheritance of his daughter, Meredith Ashby. He turned a page. The court has also reviewed 3 prior samples of Graham Ashby's handwriting submitted as part of the original probate filing by the petitioner. He paused. Even to a layperson, the inconsistencies are significant. I am ordering the letter submitted for independent forensic handwriting analysis. Pending those results, its evidentiary weight in this proceeding is 0. Diane's lawyer didn't object. He didn't move. Additionally, the judge placed both hands flat on the bench. Dr. Hale's sworn counterstatement, entered during the first session of this hearing, raises substantial questions about the accuracy, completeness, and good faith of the materials submitted by the petitioner's legal team. The psychiatric evaluation that formed the foundation of the restraining order against Meredith Ashby was built on records that omitted her military service, her classified medical history, and the true origin of the physical symptoms cited as evidence of substance abuse. He looked at Diane. She was sitting very straight. The silk blouse was wrinkled at the elbows, where her arms had been pressed against the chair. The restraining order filed against the defendant is hereby vacated, effective immediately. 21 days. That was how long it held. 21 days of a hospital parking lot. 21 days of watching a window from the third row of the visitor lot. 21 days of pressing my thumbs against my palms in a rental car while my father asked for someone named Mir, and no one let her in. You can't give those days back. A judge can vacate an order. He can't vacate a death. Additionally, Judge Whitfield's voice had not risen once. It didn't rise now. This court is referring the matter of the petitioner's sworn affidavit to the Commonwealth's attorney for review. The affidavit submitted by Diane Ashby contained specific factual claims regarding the defendant's military discharge status, substance use history, and mental health that are directly contradicted by testimony provided under oath by a credentialed psychiatric professional with first-hand knowledge. If those claims were made knowingly and with intent to mislead this court, the petitioner may face charges including perjury, fraud upon the court, and abuse of process. Diane turned to Caldwell. Her mouth formed the beginning of a word. He held up one hand without looking at her. A small motion, the universal gesture of a lawyer who knows his client, has become his liability. Your Honor, Caldwell said, standing slowly. My client reserves. Your client should reserve her energy for the investigation, Mr. Caldwell. Judge Whitfield closed the folder. This hearing is adjourned pending forensic review of the contested documents. All temporary conservatorship motions filed by the petitioner are denied. The estate of Graham Ashby will proceed through standard probate under the supervision of this court. The gavel came down. Final. Diane stood. Her chair caught on the carpet and tilted backward. She caught it with one hand. The motion was clumsy, uncontrolled. The kind of movement that happens when the body forgets it's being watched. She looked at me. Across 12 feet of courtroom air and fluorescent light and everything she had built in the last 10 weeks. Her mouth opened. Why didn't you just tell us? Her voice was thin, stripped of the performance, stripped of the silk and the pearl earrings and the confident tilt of her chin. Why didn't you just say what you were? I looked at her for a long time. The woman who boxed up my childhood photos. The woman who removed my name from my father's obituary. The woman who filed a restraining order 3 weeks before a dying man ran out of Tuesdays. You didn't ask, Diane. You weren't asking questions. You were building a case. She blinked. Her lips pressed together. You had 2 years, I said. My voice was level. My hands were flat on the table, thumbs pressed inward. Still, 2 years to ask me a single honest question about my life, about what I do, about where I go when I disappear. You never asked, not once, because you didn't want the truth. You wanted a version of me that was small enough to push out of the way. I stood. The chair didn't scrape. I pushed it back with the same deliberate precision I use for everything. The same precision I use to seal bulkheads and drag a man 14 feet through a chemical breach. You spent 10 weeks telling judges and lawyers and neighbors that I was broken, that I was dangerous, that my hands shake because I'm an addict. I held my hands up. The tremor was there. It's always there. The fine lateral oscillation that lives in my fingers like a second pulse. The shaking is what my service cost me. And you used it as a weapon because you didn't know what it was, because you never bothered to learn. She had no answer. Caldwell was packing his briefcase. His movements were small and hurried. The movements of a man trying to leave a room before the room remembers he was in it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My father gave me this watch the day I shipped out. He wore it every day until he handed it to me, and I wore it through every deployment I survived. He knew I couldn't tell him what I did. He knew I carried things I couldn't put down. And he loved me anyway. Without conditions. Without proof. Without a file folder full of accusations. I looked at the Timex on my wrist, the cracked band, the scratched crystal, the second hand still turning. That's the difference between you and him, Diane. He trusted silence. You weaponized it. She sat back down, not because anyone told her to, because her legs gave out. The chair caught her. The sound was small and empty in a room that had already moved on. I walked out of the courtroom, down the hall, through the metal detector, out the double doors, and into the November rain. It hit my face, and my blazer, and my father's watch, and it didn't feel cold. It felt like the first thing that had touched me in 7 weeks that wasn't a legal document. The aftermath came quickly. The things Diane had built fell apart in the order she'd built them. The Commonwealth's attorney opened a formal investigation within 72 hours. The forensic handwriting analysis came back in 9 days. The letter was not written by my father. The expert's report used the word fabricated 3 times and inconsistent with any known sample of the decedent's handwriting twice. A second investigation was opened into the restraining order. The original affidavit, the one that described me as a dishonorably discharged substance abuser, was flagged for perjury review. Caldwell withdrew as Diane's counsel within the week. She retained a new attorney, then a third. The third one negotiated. The estate was released through standard probate. The house, the accounts, the life insurance. Everything my father intended went where he intended it. His will, the real one. The one Diane had tried to bury under a forged letter and a fabricated portrait of a daughter who didn't exist, was upheld without modification. Diane was not arrested. Not immediately. The investigation moved slowly, the way investigations do when the evidence is documented and the charges are serious and no one is in a hurry because the outcome is already written. Perjury. Fraud upon the court. Abuse of process. Filing a false sworn statement. Each charge carried its own weight. Each one would require its own hearing, its own evidence, its own courtroom where she would sit at a table and fold her hands and learn what it feels like when someone else controls the narrative. Her real estate license was suspended pending review. 3 clients withdrew listings within the month. The brokerage she'd built her name on quietly removed her photo from the website. No announcement, no press release, just a blank space where her face had been. She learned what erasure feels like from the other side. I didn't watch it happen. I didn't need to. Some things don't require an audience. The evening after the hearing, I drove to my father's house, the house I grew up in, the house where my childhood photos had been boxed and stored in the garage, where my room had been converted to a home office, where my name had been scraped from every surface Diane could reach. I parked in the driveway. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold soil, and something underneath both of those things that I recognized but couldn't name. The smell of a place that remembers you, even when the people inside it don't. The key still worked. She hadn't changed the locks. Maybe she'd assumed she'd never have to. I walked through the front door, past the hallway where my photos used to hang, past the kitchen where my father made coffee every morning at 6:15. I passed the mantel where there were no pictures of me, not one. His recliner was at the den, brown leather, worn at the armrests, the left side lower than the right, because he always leaned that way when he read the paper. There was an indentation in the cushion that fit him. It still smelled like him. Old Spice and newsprint, and the faint mineral trace of the medication he'd taken at the end. I sat down. The house was silent. Not courtroom silent, not ship silent, not the pressurized silence of a sealed compartment or a classified briefing room. This was the silence of a place where someone used to live and doesn't anymore. The silence of a recliner that still holds the shape of a man who died, asking for his daughter. I looked at the watch. My father's Timex, the cracked band around my wrist, the scratched crystal, the engraving on the back I could feel with my thumb, even though I couldn't see it. So you always know what time it is where I am. The tremor started. Right hand first, then left. The fine lateral movement in my fingers that never stops. The permanent cost of 14 feet and a chemical breach, and a man's life saved by brute force and geometry. I pressed my thumbs against my palms, and then I stopped. I let my hands rest on the armrests of my father's chair. I let the tremor move through my fingers without locking it down, without hiding it, without pressing my thumbs inward the way I'd done 10,000 times in grocery stores and courtrooms and rental car parking lots. For the first time in 5 years, I let my hands shake. The second hand on the Timex kept turning. The house kept its silence. The November dark came down through the windows and settled around me like a blanket. And I sat in my father's chair with his watch on my wrist, and my hands open and trembling, and I did not move. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even when it comes late. And there is a kind of peace that only arrives when you stop gripping and let the cost of who you are sit in your open hands where the light can find it. I'm not Lieutenant Commander Ashby in that chair. I'm not Echo Romeo 2. I'm not a classified asset or a courtroom defendant or a name missing from an obituary. Just Meredith, sitting where her father sat, wearing what he gave her. Finally home. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.